Okay, we're back with another important chapter from John Maxwell's book, The 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth. It's chapter 4 this time, The Law of Reflection, and I hope you'll take some good notes and be serious about listening to the concepts and the principles contained in John's book on the law of reflection, what that means in general and what it's going to mean for you and for the rest of your life. So join me. Okay, welcome back. We are starting Chapter 4 of John C. Maxwell's book, The 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth. Live them and reach your potential. Thanks for hanging in there with me on the first 3 chapters. This one's about the law of reflection. Some of you may recognize the name Peter Drucker. He's an Austrian-born American management consultant, educator, and author. He passed away at 95 years old, but he was known for his writings for the philosophical and practical foundations of modern business corporations. And Peter Drucker says, follow effective action with quiet reflection. From the quiet reflection will come even more effective action. And if you want to look up something interesting, look up Peter Drucker's top 10 quotes. Things like, management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. Good thought. Learning to pause allows growth to catch up with you. You have to slow down to think about that too, right? There are many different ways of growing and a lot of lessons that we can learn in life. And there's some kinds of growth that come only if we are willing to stop, pause, and allow the lessons to catch up with us. And John refers to a lesson that he learned some years back. He was actually traveling on an extended speaking trip and landed in Kiev, Ukraine. That was one of his stops. And he was supposed to speak 3 times to a group, about 5,000 business people. He'd been there before. But what happened was he met his translator, and they got together and talked for a while, and the translator said, I've read lots of your books. You say that you want to add value to people, but that's not easy here. People don't trust leaders, and for a very good reason. Leaders don't add value to others. The translator said, I sure hope you can help them. That gentleman's words left quite an impression on John. He had to think about it, and he was recalling conversations with one of his good friends, Jim Dornan, whose organization works with many countries who were then behind what was known as the Iron Curtain. And Jim said that in any country where the government was crooked and leaders were crooked or selfish, it was really difficult for people to trust in leaders or those who were teaching leadership. As John reflected on that particular conversation, he asked himself some critical questions. Number 1, how was I feeling? The answer was sad. Living under communist rule for generations had really beaten people down, discouraged them, and made them cynical. It's no wonder. It's hard to get ahead there when you have very little hope. His next question he asked himself was, what could I do? Well, I could show them my heart. I could show them that I care. For some of those people, perhaps no leader had ever told them he cared about them and wanted them to succeed. The third question he asked himself was, how could I do that? Well, he thought, I could let them know that I knew what their situation was and that I felt for them. I could tell them that I would just be like them if I had grown up in their environment, but that there is a higher road for a leader, one where leaders actually add value to others. He also felt he could help them understand that even if they had never been valued by their leaders, they could become leaders themselves who add values to others. They could become change agents for the future success of their country themselves. So as he took a moment there and he prayed and asked God to help him deliver the message with clarity and integrity. One of the things I've heard John do over and over again in the times that I've been with him in his meetings and his trainings and met with him personally, he loves to say, and he means it from his heart, "My name is John, and I'm your friend." And he used that to soften some of the hard truths that he was going to share in his messages there in that country. And it seemed to work. It really helped. By the end of the day, they knew it. They knew that another zinger was coming, and they'd laugh in anticipation. And when it came time for him to speak, everyone was saying this phrase to each other: "My name is, and I'm your friend." You see, it's never enough for John to just show up and give a good speech when he's been invited to an event. Every time he speaks, he wants to do two things. Number one, add value to people, and he'd like to exceed the expectations of the person who invited him. He will feel that he's failed on both counts if he hadn't taken time to pause, let the honest insights from his interpreter soak in, and change his agenda. So there is power in pausing, and you can see it right here. Reflection turns experience into insight. And this isn't anything new. It's been said for over 2,000 years. The Roman Emperor Julius Caesar wrote, "Experience is the teacher of all things," in De Bello Civile. That's my Italian as best as I can do it. Well, John did say this about that: experience is the teacher of all things. John said, with all due respect, I have to disagree with that statement. Well, how dare he disagree with the Caesar? But he did, and it's true. So he said, experience is not the best teacher. Evaluated experience is. But Caesar learned to make that statement because he learned the power of reflecting on his own life and then writing about it. So how many different kinds of experiences do you have every day? It's interesting that I actually ran across, let me find it right here. I ran across the obituary of a man that had an impact on my life when I was living in Rochester, New York, and I was working for a radio station there. He's one of my clients and a good friend. His name was Fran Pierce, and his sweet wife, Mary Pierce. Fran and Mary owned a logo bookstore, and we used to get together and share our lives. He was an older gentleman. He invited me to a very significant men's retreat weekend called Curcio in Syracuse, New York, which had a profound impact on my life, and we were lifelong friends for as long as I lived in Rochester. We spent time together over a piece of pie and a cup of coffee, and we'd go down to Lake Ontario, out to one of the piers, jutting out into that vast lake that could almost be viewed as an ocean. You could not see across to Canada. And we would just spend time sharing and reflecting on life. And that was a very powerful time for me. Reflection turns experience into insight. So have you thought about how many experiences you had today? And then secondly, as I just mentioned for myself, everyone needs a time and place alone. It's one thing to try to reflect in the busyness of your office, emails, phone ringing, traffic going by, but it's really cool if you can find a little place to call your own, a little private place, and some little public parks around here that I like to sneak off to, drive up, and little ponds and trees and a very quiet place. Intentional pausing expands your thinking. I think back to all of the demands on our life. We rush from one place to another, but there are what I call, or what John calls, life markers. That's going to a place or a part of an event to meet a person that in some way marks them for life, and that was my experience with Mr. Fran Pierce. What a gentleman. What a blessing he was to me. Something important happens when we have those life markers, especially when we identify them as a time of transition, change, or transformation. Reflection allows those experiences to move from being life markers to life makers. I think of someone like Jim Rohn. I never expected to meet the man, except that he was the surprise speaker at a business convention I went to in Cancun, Mexico, many years ago. To hear him in person, what a treat. He's gone now. But if you ever want to take a look and see what he sounded like, what he looked like, and his nuggets and pearls of wisdom that he would share, just go on YouTube and look up Jim Rohn, R-O-H-N. Pausing with intention expands and enriches your thinking. I always think of someone like Brian Tracy, who I got to hear years ago. His training that he gave was intentionally slow, measured speech, so that it had time to sink in and you could reflect on it. So if you're a leader, you can probably take the normal busyness of life and multiply it by 10. Leaders are so action-oriented and have so many responsibilities that they are often guilty of moving all the time and neglecting to stop and take time to think. Yet this is one of the most important things a leader can do. A minute of thought is worth more than an hour of talk. So, like John said, I would strongly encourage you to find a place to think and discipline yourself to pause and use it. Catholic priest Henri Nouwen observed, when you are able to create a lonely place in the middle of your actions and concerns, your successes and failures slowly can lose some of their power over you. The power of I: investigation, incubation, illumination, and illustration. So investigation, there's a corny old joke about two guys who have been giving the joke of cleaning out a stable. They're up to their ankles in horse manure, and one says to the other, "There must be a horse around here somewhere." Well, some things are obvious and don't require reflection to figure them out. Others require a person to play detective. Of course, everybody remembers, I suppose, the great scientist Galileo, who said all truths are easy to understand once they are discovered. The point is to discover them. That takes investigation. So pausing means more than just slowing down to smell the roses. It also means stopping and really figuring them out. And it helps to ask questions. So let's move on to incubation. That's taking an experience of life and putting it in a slow cooker, the crock pot of your mind. It's like the flip side of prayer. It's like meditation. When I pray, I talk to God. When I meditate, I listen to Him. Incubation is listening and learning. So what quotes and ideas are you putting in your mental crock pot to let them incubate? I notice that John does the same thing that I've got accustomed to doing with my iPhone. I put notes into my notes page, my notes app on my iPhone, and that's a great place for me to file them and let them incubate. And then illumination. Well, John is also quoting Jim Rohn right here. At the end of each day, you should play back the tapes of your performance. The results should either applaud you or prod you. Jim Rohn is talking about illumination, playing back the tapes of your performance each day. These are the aha moments in your life, the epiphanies, when you experience sudden realization or insight. It's the proverbial light bulb turning on. I remember one time that I was in a meeting and all of a sudden this light bulb came on and I just got it. I knew exactly what I was supposed to do next. So that's illumination. So what about this illustration? Most good ideas are like skeletons. They provide good structure, but they need meat on their bones. They lack substance, and until they have it, they aren't that useful. So what would a speech be without good illustrations, a flat outline? Boring. What would a book be without fleshed out ideas, good stories, and insightful quotes? Illustrating is the process of putting flesh on your ideas. There's a firefighter who is also an author, and he wrote, "All of us are watchers of television, of time clocks, of traffic on the freeway, but few are observers. Everybody's looking, but not many are seeing." Is that you? It's true that for people who find a place to reflect and who are intentional about pausing, it allows learning to catch up with them. I like to say, I really need to slow down to speed up. And good questions are at the heart of reflection. When you take time to pause and reflect, begin by asking yourself a question. Whenever John is thinking and reflecting, he feels like he has hit a roadblock. He asks himself questions. If he's trying to learn something new or delve deeper into an area so he can grow, he asks questions. Tony Robbins said, successful people ask better questions, and as a result, they get better answers. It's okay not only to ask questions in your business life and in your personal life, but ask questions to yourself. It will stimulate creative thinking. Why? Because there's something about a well-worded question that often penetrates to the heart of the matter and triggers new ideas and insights. What's my biggest asset? Well, John says his is his attitude. He grew up learning a positive attitude from his father, Melvin Maxwell. His father had to overcome a naturally pessimistic outlook by reading books by people like Norman Vincent Peale. That's good stuff. We finally come to the conclusion that we don't have fewer problems, we just don't allow the problems that we have to get us down or distract us from what we believe is important. I think I've mentioned this before, and this will help this whole idea of the law of reflection, and that is my old friend Jerry Clark from Club Rhino in Dallas, Texas. He has a sheet that he handed out one time called the 30-Day Mental Fast. If you know what a fast is, that's denying yourself food or drinking or something for a period of time, sometimes for the religious holiday of Lent. Jerry's 30-Day Mental Fast has to do with reflection. He suggests that to make that happen, to give yourself a brainwash at the drive-through brainwashing company, is to turn off the TV, turn off the radio. Don't be reading magazines just for 30 days. Just focus on reflection and getting things done, listening, asking yourself questions. The 30-Day Mental Fast. Very powerful. I've made a habit of not listening to the news. Anybody's news. Newscasts, cable news. Even leaving talk radio off because I don't like to get distracted. I've got other things that can make me depressed without having to listen to the daily news. And so I avoid that, and it's a healthy thing. You don't need to know everything that's going on, trust me. So what's my biggest asset? What have I got going for me? Second question, what is my biggest liability? John says his is unrealistic expectations is a big shortcoming in his life. He's naturally optimistic, so he underestimates how much time, how much money, how much effort things are going to take. So he has to modify his expectations to be more realistic and set himself up and his team up to succeed rather than fail. Ask yourself this question, what is my highest high? For John and for myself, family. Family is the highest high, and his wife is his best friend. What's my lowest low? His lowest low has also come as a result of family, believe it or not, because he loves his family members so much. Now that they're adults, he has to let them make their own choices. Are you a little domineering with your children, with your adult children I'm talking about? Years ago, John was having a talk with a guy named Ron Blue and Howie Hendricks when his children were still teenagers. And John said, "When is this parenting thing over?" They told him, "It never ends." They were right. But he's learned that he has to stay out of his grown children's decision-making unless they ask for his advice. Next question, what's my most worthwhile emotion? Perhaps the most worthwhile emotion is love. Love is what we do. We love our friends, we love our family, we even love our enemies. As a person of faith, I know that this is the standard that God has set for me, and it's the desire of my heart. So how does this help me grow? Because love is a choice. Love is more than just an emotion or a reaction. Love is a choice. So to love others, as I would like to do, I must be intentional about it and choose to love people every day. Next question. What's my least worthwhile emotion? Well, maybe self-pity. It's destructive and self-serving. A book by Eugene Peterson, he says, pity is one of the noblest emotions available to the human being. Self-pity is possibly the most ignoble. Pity is the capacity to enter into the pain of another in order to do something about it. Self-pity is an incapacity, a crippling emotional disease that severely distorts our perception of reality. It's a crippling emotional disease. Pity discovers the need in others for love and healing, and then fashions speech and actions that bring strength. Self-pity reduces the universe to a personal wound that is displayed as proof of significance. Pity is adrenaline for acts of mercy. Self-pity is a narcotic that leaves its addicts wasted and derelict. Reminds me of a song written years ago by the Beatle George Harrison, Isn't It a Pity, produced by Phil Spector. Isn't it a pity? Isn't it a shame how we break each other's hearts and cause each other pain? How we take each other's love without thinking anymore, forgetting to give back. Now, isn't it a pity? What's my best habit? The Chancellor of St. Paul's in London way back in the 1800s observed, what we do on some great occasion will depend on what we are, and what we are will be the result of previous years of self-discipline. Question number 8. What is my worst habit? John says, without a doubt, my worst personal trait is impatience. It was part of my early nature as a child. When he was a child, we used to visit my grandpa Maxwell. It never failed that at some point while we were there, he would sit my brother Larry and me down in 2 chairs and offer to pay us a nickel if we would sit quietly in those chairs for 5 minutes. Larry always earned his nickel, and I never did, not one time. Impatience. I can relate to that. What's most fulfilling to you? John says for him it's communicating with people. He loves to communicate. He's in his strength. He was made for this. Early in his career, he knew that it was fulfilling for him to learn communication, and he was prompted to become a better speaker because, quite frankly, he says felt like he wasn't very good at it. So for more than 10 years, he dedicated himself to learning how to grow in that area. It was fulfilling. What's fulfilling for you? What's your most prized possession? Mother Teresa said, faith keeps the person who keeps the faith. That's true. Author Philip Yancey described faith as trusting in advance what will only make sense in reverse. Having faith and knowing its value in my life helps me to have a divine perspective every day. So you can ask yourself these questions in just about any area of your life to help you pause, focus, and learn. Here's some more questions. Do I value people? Do people know that I value them? How do I show it? Am I a plus or a minus person in my relationships? What evidence do I have to confirm my opinion? What is the love language of the people I love? How can I serve them? Do I need to forgive someone in my life who needs to be given grace? Who in my life should I take time to thank? Question 10, who in my life should be receiving more of my time? Will it be worth it, really? All of this probably sounds like a lot of steps and a lot of trouble. Well, you're right, it is. That's why most people will never do it. But you are not most people. It is worth every bit of the effort you put into it. The farther you go in life, the more critical it is that you take time to pause and think. The older you are, less time you have to stay on purpose and do things that you were created to do. But here's the good news. If you've been diligent in your efforts to grow along the way, you will also be better equipped to fulfill that purpose, even if it requires you to make significant changes or course corrections. I have a friend named Lloyd Reeb, and Lloyd is the primary spokesperson for the halftime program. Lloyd wrote a book when I was living in his area in North Carolina called From Success to Significance. And he has put on seminars and trainings all over the United States, even here on the West Coast. Lloyd worked with the founder of the halftime movement, Bob Buford, out of Texas, who owned a chain of television stations. And Buford wrote a book called The Second Half. It's a fantastic book. The entire book is a pause so that growth can catch up with you experience. And it just so happens that Bob Buford was also a personal friend of Peter Drucker for many years, the gentleman I mentioned earlier in this training. Bob Buford says, "You will not get very far in your second half without knowing your life mission. Can yours be stated in a sentence or two? A good way to begin formulating one is with some questions and nakedly honest answers. What is your passion? What have you achieved? What have you done uncommonly well? How are you wired? Where do you belong? What are the shoulds that have trailed you during the first half?" These and other questions like them will direct you toward the self your heart longs for. They will help you discover the tasks for which you were especially made. In wrapping up this chapter on the law of reflection, let me remind you of this. Never forget that your goal in personal growth is reaching your potential. To do that, you need to keep pausing, keep asking questions, and keep growing every day. Thank you so much for joining with me, and we will bring you the next chapter in just a few days, so be watching for that. The law of consistency. Motivation gets you going, discipline keeps you growing. I appreciate you. Have a great day.